Hi everyone, I'm Kevin and this is HFX by Bike, a channel all about getting around Halifax by bike. The Macdonald Bridge is one of the most important pieces of Halifax's transportation network, moving about 50,000 vehicles per day and 3,500 per hour during rush hour. It serves cars, transit, bikes, and pedestrians, and forms a vital link between downtown Halifax, Dartmouth, and the suburbs north of the harbour. For people who get around by bike, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The Macdonald Bridge has a separated bidirectional bike lane on the western side that connects to a set of protected lanes in Dartmouth and a multi-use path running along Barrington and Halifax. But there's a catch. The bridge can only be accessed by bike from Barrington Street. Someone wanting to get onto the Macdonald Bridge while approaching from, let's say, the Isleville Bikeway a few blocks south of the bridge can't just directly bike onto it. They must first ride down North Street in open traffic, down the ramp to Barrington, and then navigate up the bikeway ramp onto the bridge. It's worse coming from the Dartmouth side. Someone wanting to cross the bridge on bike and navigate to where the Isleville Bikeway intersects with North Street would be sent on a nearly 2.5 kilometer or 7.5 minute long detour to North Bernard Street. Or, if the 15% grade is too steep there, go on a 5.5 kilometer or about a 17-minute detour all the way to Morris Street downtown, instead of just covering the roughly 200 meters between the bridge and the bikeway in about half a minute. Alternatively, if adding a quarter of an hour to your trip isn't viable, you bike down the ramp, wait for a gap in traffic at the intersection of Barrington and North, hop off the pedestrian island, and bike up North Street uphill in free-flowing traffic. This state of affairs makes it inconvenient or dangerous to access the bridge depending on the route taken, and acts as a major barrier to crossing the harbour for newer cyclists. This has been the status quo for nearly 25 years, and so as a birthday treat to myself, I'm going to run through all the obvious and not so obvious options to improve access to the only bikeable path across the harbour. There are three main problems facing cyclists using the bridge. The double hill problem, i.e. the need to climb multiple hills or the same hill multiple times, the indirectness problem, the need to go on lengthy detours, and the protection problem, the need to bike through open traffic to use the bridge. I'll assess each of the solutions for how well they solve these problems, as well as try to anticipate any other problems they create that would prevent them from being implemented. Just a few things to get out of the way before we get started. There are two things that would make the existing bikeway configuration a lot easier to use at little cost. The first is that the existing bikeway ramp on Barrington has a path hidden behind a column. It limits visibility and forces cyclists heading to and from the Barrington Greenway to make a hairpin turn on a steep slope. The crossing should be reoriented to be both more visible to drivers in the slip lane and oriented to be more of a continuous path for people traveling by bike. Second, there's a similar issue for bikes heading down the North Street ramp towards Barrington. The turn onto the bikeway requires a hairpin turn on a steep slope in a space that's shared with pedestrians. Adding a smoother turn path for bikes, making a left-hand turn, would make this movement a lot easier for almost no cost at all. Lastly, just so that I don't have to discuss it for each of the separate designs, you can assume that there's a piece of bike infrastructure on North Street south of Gottingen for bikes to approach and leave the area. The city has plans for a bidirectional protected lane on the western side of North Street to connect to the Isleville Bikeway, so you can just assume that it's present in all the design options, even if I don't mention it explicitly. With all that out of the way, let's see what the status quo looks like. The area between Gottingen and Barrington is doing a lot of different things. Here are all the different traffic flows in the area with different modes marked with different colors. I've omitted some paths that aren't really important for anything that we're doing today, but I think it gives you a sense of all the different things happening in this space. Because it's so central, and because the problems around biking over the bridge have festered for decades, a lot of opinions have been offered about the best way to fix it. A common suggestion is just swapping the bike and pedestrian lanes on the bridge, which would look something like this. The main benefit of this approach is that bikes gain the ability to get onto the bridge by biking directly down North Street. And that's pretty much it. You would no longer be able to access the bridge from anywhere other than North Street, so we're just swapping one set of detours for another. If you're coming off of the bridge, you get dumped into oncoming traffic, which seems suboptimal. We can address some of these problems by adding a protected lane along the eastern side of North Street, which would eat the right turn lane. Then there's the three-phase signal it would take to get bikes from the eastern side of North Street to the bike lane waiting on the opposite side of Gottingen. These add-ons combined would have a lot of implications for traffic flow and the ability of transit to move through the area. The bike lane would have a lot of holes in it, as cars can move to and from Wood Avenue and Brunswick Street, and then down the ramp to Barrington. We could try to close some of these off, but Wood Avenue only has the one entrance, and the ramp to Barrington is the only alternative to those exiting Wood Avenue and Brunswick that don't want to travel to Dartmouth via the bridge. So our bike lane is pretty much guaranteed to have cars popping in and out of it constantly, not to mention transit riders waiting for their bus on it. All that aside, this approach just reassigns the inconvenient pathing from bikes to pedestrians, which is obviously not ideal. I think swapping the pedestrian and cyclist side of the bridge manages to solve the double hill and indirectness problem, but only for specific approaches. Any workable version would have a bike lane to protect access, but adding the bike lane creates a series of problems that would mean the city would never actually do it. Where the first approach swapped the side of the bridge used by cyclists and pedestrians, this option just turns both sides into multi-use paths shared by both modes. If someone on a bike wanted to go to or from downtown Halifax, they would use the west side of the bridge, and if they wanted to go to the North Street, they would use the east side of the bridge. The obvious benefit of this approach is that it maximizes the flexibility for both cyclists and pedestrians, but again, that's pretty much it. Their eastern side would absorb all of the same issues as the first approach I just went over, need all of the same solutions to be viable, and create all of the same headaches that mean it would never actually be implemented. And even then, there's probably not enough space for this to work very well. The city's minimum width for bidirectional bikeway is 3 meters. Each side of the bridge is 2.6 meters. The bikeway is already somewhat cramped for space without adding in pedestrians, who I can't imagine would enjoy having bikes buzz past them on such a narrow path. So I think this approach lands in a similar space as the first one. Mostly it solves problems just by creating different, worse problems that the city would never tolerate. The first two approaches are commonly pitched by people who don't get around by bike, while this one is probably one of the more common ones among those that do. It involves cutting a hole in the fence that separates the existing bikeway ramp from the western portion of North Street and connecting it to a bidirectional multi-use path running along the western edge of that road. Something kind of like this. In a very straightforward way, this would actually tick all of the boxes and for low cost. People on bike would be able to move between Gottingen, the bridge, and Barrington in whatever direction they wanted. There are two major hangups that would prevent this from ever happening, though. The first is that there are legitimate safety concerns. Cars coming off the bridge and moving down to Barrington along a slip lane bordering the bikeway are moving at about 60 to 70 kilometers an hour with poor visibility of anyone trying to cross in that space. The point of this redesign is to make trips across the bridge by bike more convenient and accessible to a larger pool of people, and I think playing Frogger with fast-moving traffic falls short on that account. You might think that a traffic signal would solve this problem, and you'd be right in theory, but the city has considered this option, and no. Here's a 2017 blog post by City Councillor and current Deputy Mayor Sam Austin. The barrier to cutting the gap in the fence isn't just safety, it's an unwillingness to slow down traffic coming off the bridge to address those safety issues. And to be fair, this would actually have pretty catastrophic effects in terms of getting cars off the bridge efficiently. So this would solve all of our problems at low cost, but would generate either major safety concerns or so many unintended consequences that the city would never actually do it. Okay, so the entire area north of Gottingen is a spiderweb of car lanes we can't cross, but what if we just go over the whole thing? Anyone who's been following the issue for the last decade or so is going to know where I'm going with this. The city currently has plans to build a bike flyover that connects from Gottingen directly to the Bridge Bikeway by going over the entire space between the two. This would involve zero interaction with traffic in the area and disrupt no cars, transit, or pedestrians, so it's perfect. There's just one thing. The design work on the flyover started in 2015 with an estimated cost of around $2 million and a time to completion of 2 to 3 years. Flash forward to 2017 and the cost has increased to $6.2 million and a completion date of 2021. Another time jump to 2022, there's no flyover and the estimated cost is now $12.7 million. Last update has it ready for 2024, but as I make this video in the waning days of 2023, I don't know. The funding for the project has been extended to 2028. I'm relatively new to getting around by bike, so this isn't something I was generally aware of until last year. I'm not a flyover denier, but the longer it takes to start construction and the higher the costs go, the more skeptical I am that the city is ever going to spend that kind of money on a single project that only benefits cyclists. So the flyover solves all of our problems, but the main downside seems to be the cost. In theory, it should have been done years ago, and in 4 years, the federal funding that makes this project viable is going to dry up. All of the approaches on the table try to get bikes to and from the bridge by moving the path of the bikes around the web of existing roadways used by cars. But what if instead of trying to move the bikes, we just move the cars instead? In a post earlier this year, local blogger Denny Sullivan made the case for shifting how car traffic gets onto the bridge during closures and other kinds of traffic disruptions. One of the solutions involves discouraging and preventing cars from getting onto the bridge from the direction of North Street. Since it's a single-lane road in each direction with frequent lights and crosswalks, it can never effectively move traffic to or from the much higher capacity bridge. This routinely backs up traffic clear across the peninsula and interferes with cars in transit trying to exit the downtown during rush hour. Halifax is a rapidly growing city, and traffic issues at bottlenecks like the Macdonald Bridge are only going to get worse as time goes on. So what if instead of prioritizing traffic between the downtown and Macdonald only during closures, we just make that the default? This approach tries to fix traffic flows on the bridge, which then just makes it a lot easier to find space to move bikes through the area. Here's the status quo, and here's what it looks like optimized to move cars to and from downtown. Let's work through some of the changes. The basic premise here is that for cars, the only way on or off the bridge is via Barrington. Cars coming off the bridge would now take a left-hand turn onto an expanded and repurposed ramp leading down to Barrington. Both lanes feed directly onto Barrington without stopping, and with the roundabout being installed on the recently renamed Nora Bernard Street as part of the Cogswell redevelopment, cars would experience free-flowing traffic between the tolls in Dartmouth and Duke Street downtown. For the drivers that would normally go up North Street instead of heading down to Barrington, they can head up either Nora Bernard or Cogswell to get to wherever they were going. This would add about a 60-second detour relative to the status quo, but there would be less time stuck in traffic, as the North and Gottingen intersection would no longer serve as a bottleneck. Getting on the bridge would use the existing ramp extending off of Barrington, with the main difference being that this approach would no longer be sharing a signal with car traffic coming off of North Street. This means that, just like in the inbound direction, traffic would be free-flowing from downtown all the way to the tolls in Dartmouth. You may have noticed that North Street is still connected to the bridge, and that's because I've converted the street north of Gottingen into a kind of transit mall. Buses getting onto the bridge this way would disrupt the flow of inbound car traffic, so I've put in a cut-and-cover channel to allow buses to just go over them without issue. Note that some level of transit priority could be assigned here based on how buses are intended to merge into outbound traffic coming off of Barrington, but that's kind of out of scope for this video. Back at the North Street Transit Mall, buses retain the ability to navigate down their own separate lane to Barrington, where priority signals would let them move efficiently to wherever they need to go. The military base and Wood Avenue can still navigate around the area, but my intention is that they would enter and leave via Gottingen. Brunswick Street is blocked off because I honestly just don't want a lot of car traffic disrupting transit operations in the area. I've maintained or enhanced some of the approaches pedestrians take to get to the bridge pedway, so I'm not going to go over that too much. Okay, so cars are now moving more efficiently, transit has higher priority and should be less prone to getting stuck in traffic, and pedestrians can cross the entire area for the most part without interacting with cars. Where do we put the bike lane? And I just stuck it here, along the current roadway since it's direct and essentially free asphalt at this point. The remainder of what is currently the bridge ramp would just be turned into a park, or the land could be sold for development to try to recoup some of the costs of the retrofit. This approach solves the issue of where to put bikes by first solving where to put cars, and even if we weren't interested in better connecting the bridge to the bike network, I actually think most of these changes to the traffic flows would be worthwhile in their own right. The main downside of this approach is that it pretty radically redesigns the way that traffic moves through the city, and the city government isn't exactly famous for thinking outside of the box. Those are 5 approaches to getting bikes to and from the Macdonald Bridge. Let me know in the comments which one you prefer, or if there's an approach that I've missed. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.